We grew up in the hood like most black folks. Little did they know it comes gorillas from the south coast. Breaking the booze out, living and broken in many pieces. Black rain for not five, explosion posse going to sit with this revolutionary tactic. Them flips up out of my mattress. I practice pro-blackness, not to say I'm prejudice, what's in the darkness. No, I'm not suicidal, but I'm dying for my people. No, I'm not arrogant, I distinguish good from evil. I use the world on grounds, align my mind to burn from ignorance. I cut away my perm, I got strong, some can't deal with this mentality. Thinking I'm weak, I'm not no gangster. It won't be televised how many times my posse pull the trigger. Lord, oh Lord, am I the devil too, or am I really the son? Unto the throne, son, the flock is true. Image of you, a portrait that I could not never see. Dumb as I may be, I never go, I kamikaze G. Genocide.
I would say is relevant because what we're talking about is balance and being. And these are the kind of things that go into what creates people identifying with a purpose and what creates people identifying with having a drive, a will, or being able to stay focused enough on any specific thing that makes them to makes them able to tackle community work, able to tackle life, able to tackle being focused, being disciplined, and having a path. So I think, unlike where we kind of just get into basic political education, the idea here is to kind of dial it back a little bit and go into some mind science, dial it back a little bit and going into addressing knowing who you are, what you are, why you are, and so forth. Because I think oftentimes people end up in, movements or struggles or situations simply because they're trying to find themselves. And then in trying to find themselves, they're trying to identify with purpose. Well, when you're trying to identify with purpose and you lost within who you are, period, and recognizing, just what it is to be on a path, what it is to be on a journey, I think, you putting the concept before the work. I mean, I should say the work before the concept. I apologize on that. That's what I meant. The work before the concept. And doing it that way is going to cause you to maybe jump into something, but not be sincere. And if you're not sincere, then you ain't going to give it your all. Then you may do a disservice to yourself as well as to the community and to the people by just coming at it from that approach. So to me, that's why it's relevant, because I think a lot of people need to recognize that when they're looking for what it is that they want to be involved in, make sure that they understand who they are. Make sure they have some sense of recognition that if they don't know who they are, that they need to identify with the fact that this is really what I'm trying to figure out at this moment in time. Not that I actually want to help people, not that I actually want to be involved in the community or do more, but I'm trying to figure out who I am. And I think it's important that people be able to distinguish the difference between genuinely wanting to be involved in activism or genuinely want to actually be concerned about humanity in the direction of the world, as well as knowing, what place do I have, or realizing that I have a place.
I think that it's information, so it has a place just from that perspective. But the reality of it is, when we talk about things like spirituality and all of that, one of the things that always put me off, which I don't even like the word spiritual. I'm spiritual. That just means you don't feel like going to church now because it's just so mainstream. It's fucking meaningless. You know what I'm saying? So when we say things like spiritual path and spirituality and all of these things, one of the things that always kept me away, and me and Ward talked about this years ago, is this lottie-dolly, tulips and daisies, happy, the spiritual looking out for me, blah, blah, blah type of thing that just always put a bad taste in my mouth. It's like a romantic comedy. Everything is just, hunky-dory. There's a little bit of an issue, and then everything wraps up nicely at the end. And that's kind of the perception that people have about spirituality, is that it's just this nicey place. and there's no real there's no real concept of it beyond, you know, this Disney presentation of what spirituality is. People have no clue. So giving some type of perspective that takes into account more, you know, even those of us that have gotten into the so-called spiritual systems and whatnot, a lot of times get caught up in things like ma'at and confusing ma'at, the observance, the principles and all of that for what ma'at actually is. You know, people don't, I've rarely heard anybody talk about what ma'at actually means. We talk about the 7 principles, blah, blah, but we don't talk about what ma'at actually represented, what, you know, the bigger picture and that sort of thing. And so, I mean, it all feeds back into the religious brainwashing and misunderstandings that have just grown exponentially. We don't understand religion, so we damn sure don't understand, you know, anything greater than that, you know, bigger than that. So I think that it's very relevant for those because it's a natural progression of the evolution. If somebody is actually watching and building and growing, at some point, it will be part of their evolution that's going to come up, that's going to be, you know, a question, you know, that's just a part of the process. So might as well get in and put some groundwork on it, throw some things out there that may or may not be popular or talked about quite a bit, even on the internet. So yeah, I think that's the relevance that we have. You know, we had a responsibility to delve into that too, even though we don't want to talk about religion because it puts people off and divides and all of that. Screw that. It needs to be addressed. So word.
Well, one of the things that I've always when I look at concepts like revolution, like when we talked about the man and woman relationship, and the question was asked, you know, what does that have to do with revolution? And it has everything to do with revolution, because when you're talking about basically, like y'all both said, when we're talking about the positive change and the evolution of any type of community, you have to be able to deal with every aspect of the community. Relationships between people are part of a community. Economics are part of a community. Defense is part of a community. These things are all part of the community. So these are subjects any true revolutionary group or council has to be able to deal with. And spirituality, religion, higher states of consciousness, or whatever term you want to call it, is also part of the community. So these are things that have to be discussed. Now, I'm a proponent of the old school of thought that Malcolm talked about. When Malcolm said, when we come together, we're going to talk about our political issues and leave our religion at the door. And the reason then Huey and Bobby took that same concept when they developed the Panther Party in Oakland, when they developed that branch, so to speak, of the Panther Party. They took that concept, you know, as we all know, that they call themselves the ideological heirs of Malcolm X, because they saw the importance of that. See, a lot of times, especially in revolutionary groups, people come together and they get into big arguments over religion, and we can never get any work done because we're trying to argue whether or not we should call the creative being God or Allah. Is the greatest prophet in those teachers Jesus or Muhammad, or should we be studying Krishna or whoever the hell as a person might be driven to? I have a brother, matter of fact, right now, that his whole thing is to be a kingdom citizen, you know, walk in the footsteps of Jesus. And for the most part, he can't hear anything other than that. So we can't talk about community change or economic development. And if we do talk about it, I would have to submit to the concept and ideal of walking in the footsteps of Jesus for us to be on the same playing field. And I think that's why that was important to keep those discussions out. Me, myself, personally, I rarely have religious-based conversations. And the reason I don't is because I like to deal with, I believe that it's important for any sincere revolutionary, when they start building with the people, they need to build with the people on their base survival needs. They need to deal with those things first, and they need to speak to the people with words and touching on points and views that's immediate and important to the people right now, before we go to dealing with high levels of consciousness. Because a lot of times we're dealing with people that can't even make rent. So moving to a higher level of consciousness is the furthest thing from their minds, so that's my view on it, on those things. That's why I never discuss those things.
Yeah, it kind of started with War's revelation about some things he'd been partaking in doing, and kind of your reaction to it. The whole, just, I mean, it wasn't necessarily anything negative. It was just, yeah, that kind of makes sense with my perception of where you're at, and we haven't talked about, this type of stuff. We haven't chopped it up on that kind of stuff in what 20 damn years now. But yeah, it wasn't anything specific, and anything that I would say would kind of, put the man's business in the streets, and I'm not going to do that. But yeah, there are you referenced, what's his name, Huey and Bobby, Huey and them, and observation and participation. I know that's one of you like to reference that from time to time. And my take, I mean, it's applicable. I know that what they were saying was not in reference to any spiritual concept or anything of that nature, but the idea is still applicable. Things like religion are observation. Their observation of rules, their observances of the rule of law. And whether we call that, religion, Christianity, Islam, we call that religion working out, because let's face it, you work out religiously, and I think that what makes that an appropriate statement is the dogma and the discipline and the rigorous, the rules. And there comes a point where observation has to give way to participation. It's like, if you look at the front side of a penny, logically that penny has a backside. It from reasoning, from experience. If you've never seen a penny, that penny has a backside. But until you flip it around, you don't know it. You believe it, but you don't know it. You're theorizing, but you don't know it. And that's kind of what the discipline and the rules and the dogma and everything, the observance, the whole purpose, the whole point of those observances is to take you to the threshold of participation, to get you prepared to participate. And they're all good and they serve their purpose and everything. But until we step out of the dogma and into the participation, then we're still sitting there in theory, and we're not participating, so, and y'all told me to not bring up such and such, so I'm trying not to go over there and bring up that particular thing, even though, what, screw y'all. So things like astral projection. Astral projection is, and War, check me if I veer off, but astral projection is an application. It's an experience of where the dogma, where the rules, where the discipline take you to. And then when you step over to some type of non-corporeal, non-physical existence, which is what that is, then you're stepping into the realm of participation. Because we talk about the illusion and how, none of this is quote unquote real or substantive or whatever, this table, this computer, my fingers, everything around us is an illusion, but it's theory. We can reason it, we can logic, we can use all of those things, but until we move from the external, the experience of those reasonings, and step into the experience of the actual application, of the actual participation, then again, we're still just talking about it. So that's the significance of something like that. And I know War has a lot more examples, but that's the one I'm kind of keying in on, because that was part of the text conversation that stood out and caught my attention. It's I want to say it's simple or easy, which it actually is, a way to leave this illusion, to leave this life that we identify with, without actually experiencing death. So it's the actual application of stepping outside of the illusion. I mean, if that makes any sense.
Well, let me bring us to a good starting point on that, just so we can balance the playing field by going over defining balance. Balance is the unity in control of thought, perception, and action. So the unity and control of thought, perception, and action, which I refer to as the trifactor, one of the trifactors. Now, what is a trifactor? I will give us an easier way to go into the trifactor by talking about, when you hear people talk about the third eye or the pineal gland from that standpoint, think of the eye as being energy, everything yielding energy, put it that way. Everything yielding energy, the three, is how I refer to the eye. Whether you're talking about the letter I or the eye itself, which is, again, talking about thought, perception, and action, is the connection between thought and action, which is our perception. Because our perception is what gets us in the environment, or how we interact with the environment and how we define the environment, as well as how we defend. When we talk about the 3Ds, which is another trifactor within the Panther Party that we go over. So anytime we get into trifactors, which is basically your existence within this realm and how you go about that. How do you get to that level? So balance gives us ability to recognize that these things have to come into play. So if your thought is warped, then your perception is going to be warped, which means your action is going to be warped. And so from that standpoint, just like where E is going with the astral projection, that whole idea right there of esoteric abilities is something that most people consider to be, just some far out concept, or thing, or something that just doesn't even make sense, or something that may be, in their mind, may be associated with witchcraft or voodoo or something like that. And the problem with that is that titles have been placed on certain things that should be a natural ability, but because we are out of balance in terms of who we are as individuals navigating this world, then our perception is flawed. So when our perception is flawed, I would think these specific practices are out of reach from the average person. Because again, when your perception has a certain connotation, when you hear certain words or certain practices, then it's not for you, because you're not ready. You're not a student at that point. And not being a student, you can't be a practitioner. If you can't be a practitioner, then you can't have that experience. You don't have that experience. Kind of one of the cliches I would go back to, it's like trying to define what an apple or orange or anything tastes like if you never tasted it, but just trying to have words that express what it is. So when we talk about dealing with balance to that degree, and tools of recognizing balance, tools of being able to deal with stepping outside of yourself in order to gain a better perception on all of life, then there's only so much I can say by trying to put words to that expression and that experience, without you having the ability to actually take that experience. And so if you're not able to take part in that experience, then there are certain aspects of balance that are just not going to be available to you. And if that's not available to you because you are not conditioned to be able to experience it, when we talk about finding who you are, when we talk about dealing with developing a purpose, these are just additional things that are not going to be applicable to your perception or your ability to be able to impact other people, as well as how you're able to journey within yourself. So if I'm not able to fully be in tune with who I am, then what does that say about me being in tune with the family? What does that say about me being in tune with the community? Another trifactor. We talk about the individual, the family, and the community. All things needing to be in balance. So that trifactor need to be in balance. But again, if my perception is flawed, my thought is flawed, and my action is flawed or diseased, then these experiences are just not available to me. And so from that standpoint, talking about astral projection is just, that would be just a concept that I could even give you a definition for, but it just doesn't make sense to you, and you don't see the relevance of it because what? Your perception is not right within itself, because you haven't defined, developed, and therefore have no defense to being able to go into it.
Earlier, you mentioned religion, and you said we're not going to get into that to a certain because of what mainstream religion means. And I'm gonna go into the areas that War touched on a little bit, as far as a person dealing with self-care and introspection, because that was the purpose of religion, and kind of like what you went into with the workout. Religion is essentially a workout program. It's like when people hire personal trainers to create a workout program and a diet program for them so they can lose weight. And that's what religion is for, quote unquote, the unspiritual man in the truest sense of what the word means. That's what religion is meant for. The word religion comes from the Latin. Re means back, legion means to bind. So the word religion literally means to bind back. And the concept was that man naturally is attached to God, or the creative energy of the universe. And it's the things in our temporal reality that grabs our attention and not the word lust, what is the word? Tempts us to forgetting about our connection. So those things kind of pull us away. They have a magnetic pull on us, whether those things are drugs, sex, greed, things like this. And the practice of religion are supposed to bind you back to the creator, supposed to bind you back to your origin. That's the idea. If you look at the Hindu story of Kundalini in India, it said that Kundalini was a goddess. And it was her walking in the heavens that basically made the sun shine as light, that brightened the earth. But as she was walking through the heavens, she saw a hole, and she heard some noises down in that hole, and she got curious. So she climbed down this rope down into the hole, and then she climbed from the heavens up to the earth. When she got on the earth and saw all the temporal things on the earth, it caught her attention. So she started running through the earth, having fun, tasting things, participating in all the physical activities. And when she started doing this, then she saw the dark things, which scared her. And it made her go hide in a cave. And when she went and hid in the cave, the sun's light automatically went out. So the sun's light was out for however long the story said the sun's light was out, until the master teachers came along, because they was looking for her, because they wanted her to take her proper place so that there could be light on the planet. Now, as you know, this is all the story. It's a metaphor. It's an allegory. It all has its own symbolic meaning. But the master teachers found her in the cave, and they started performing the ancient rituals, which lured her out of the cave. And then, kind of like the Pied Piper, they led her back to the rope, where she climbed the rope back into the heavens, and then the lights came back on, or the sun started back shining on the planet. Now, symbolically, Kundalini represents the mind, or that essential energy of the human being. Her being in the heavens represent that energy being in the head, or at the crown chakra. Her climbing down the rope represents the spine, as that energy can move up and down the spine to the lower chakra, to the highest chakra. In Western psychology, they say that the brain is the seat of the mind. In Eastern psychology, it's the brain and the brain stem, the entire central nervous complex, and the entire central nervous system. And depending on where your mind is at, you can essentially look at a person's habits, the things that they focus on, and you can see where their mind is at, whether it's at the base chakra, whether it's at the heart chakra, throat chakra, or if it's at the crown chakra. You could tell where their mind is at. And when it says that Kundalini went into the cave, that's when a person hides in that base chakra, that sacral chakra. And that chakra deals with pure survival. And when you're dealing with a person where their mind or their Kundalini is there, then you're dealing with someone who's completely focused on basic survival. That's a person just looking to eat, sleep, and come up any way they can. They looking to make sure that they're safe and secure, and that's it. Same thing. I ain't going to go through the whole chakra system, but same thing. If you see a person that's completely focused on sex or being in love, you know that they're at their second chakra. You know that that's where their Kundalini energy is at. And the ancient wise men bringing those ancient teachings to the cave, which led her out of the cave, is talking about when a man or a woman comes into some kind of conscious understanding and they start learning the ancient teachings, the prophetic teachings, when they start learning. So, and the ancient wise men finding Kundalini in the cave represents when a man or a woman comes into certain levels of consciousness, when they introduce the new knowledge, how that brings their higher self out of that lower state and they start raising it to that higher state all the way till it get to the point where the light starts back shining, what we call enlightenment. You know, so those are the purposes of those things. But as you said earlier, E, there comes a time when you have to move from just conversation or reading about it to actualizing it. And we'll see that in the story of Jesus. In the story of Jesus, Yeshua ben Yosef, in that story, we'll see him. There's a point in the story where it says he stepped off the boat and stepped on water and walked on water. And as he walked across the water, you know, when you're dealing with the super spooky-minded religious Negro, he thinks that this guy literally walked on water 2,000 years ago. And that's not what this is talking about. In this story, the boat represents the religion or the dogma. It represents those that system of beliefs that help a man elevate to that high state. But him stepping out of the boat and stepping on water represents man when he reaches that high state of consciousness and he no longer needs that system, where the system then becomes irrelevant because it has fulfilled its duty for man. So you step on the water. In those ancient times, to those ancient people, water represented wisdom, fire represented knowledge, and water represented wisdom. And the boat is the vehicle that you travel through water with. That's what these systems do for us. These quote unquote religious systems give you the ability to navigate the water. But when he stepped out of the boat and stepped on the water, it showed his proficiency in that spiritual understanding and spiritual development, where the boat was no longer needed.
So I would take it one step further with the boat stepping on the water. Because remember, even more ancient, the concept or the idea of water is the abyss. You know, the fluidity and the floating and all of that. Water in ancient times also represented the abyss from which everything was birthed out of and into, so to speak. The boat, extending that analogy, that idea, is actually your body. The boat is your corporeal vessel, the vessel that you use to navigate this world. And at some point, all this, the rules, the dogma, the religion, all of it, you have to step away from. Okay, you've learned these lessons. Now it's time for you to go out into the abyss. Now it's time for you to go step out onto that water, into the beginning times, the end times, all of that, the world or the existence where there are no, you know, these rules as we've come to understand rules to be. So I don't disagree at all with, I mean, that analogy is great. I love that analogy. I just think that analogy goes only so far, but it can be built on further. Like I said, if your body is the boat that you use to navigate through the abyss, and the water is the abyss itself. So all of these rules, religions and whatnot are there for the purpose of getting us to a point where we're able to step into the abyss before death, before, you know, whatever comes afterwards. We're able to control, manipulate, and go into that and have that experience, because none of it, all the rules and religion and everything are experience. Whatever it is you do, you go to church, you work out, you run, whatever it is, that's an experience. And that experience, that external, can only rationalize and get you to the point of saying, hey, there's an experience, there's something else, there's something more. So, and at that point, we have to let go of depending on the experience and looking at the experience, you know, and, you know, it not only just astral projection, but things like LSD and mushrooms and even weed. You know, back in the day when we was kicking it in Africa, it wasn't nothing for us to get what we would call today, get high. and, you know, go fight a war. You know, Zulu warriors and others, you know, get wired up, drink certain potions and whatnot before they go to battle, in order to receive information and ideas and guidance. We had those that they would call witch doctors or shamans or whatever, who would get up on the peyote or whatever it was that they were drinking or smoking, and go into that inner experience. They had rules. They would talk to people, okay, put this, so it's like the Black Panther, when he laid down and they mixed up this certain potion a certain way. All of this is experience. All of these are rules. Mash it up, lay down like this, put them in this hole, lay them down, have this ceremony, da 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 da, and then sip this. At that point, he sipped that and began going elsewhere. Experience was gone. Experience was irrelevant. Experience was dead. He was on an inexperience. He was on an internal journey. And that's, you know, when we talk about even male, female, the polarity of the situation, the Osar, the male, is this experience. It's the workouts, it's the religion, it's everything that we experience that's tangible. At some point, all of that tangibility has to get us to a point where we're ready to experience or we're ready to touch the female and go to the experience, because that's what she is. She's the experience, and going and that's, you know, biologically, you know, the penis is outward. Her primary sexual organ is inward. So all of that feeds into that same idea that at some point, African people have historically not had a problem, you know, mushrooms, like I said, weed and whatever. And it's these rules, the religion and the dogma and everything that define and differentiate us getting high, quote unquote, high back then, and us getting high now. We get high now just because, no rules, no direction, no guidance, no purpose. Whereas at one point in time, we would smoke, you know, drink similar types of things, but we had rules. Why do we have rules? Because we had a purpose. That purpose was to have that divine experience, to step out of and beyond this physical, because we could see this physical and we knew this physical. We had this theory, but we also knew by reasoning that there was more. So all of these different things that we would do would guide us to have that experience that is a much bigger cosmos. You know, I don't know about y'all, but I spend a lot of nights sitting on the porch, you know, because I ain't got nobody in my life, but whatever, sitting on the porch. So I spend a lot of nights sitting on the porch looking at the moon and the stars and whatnot. And it occurs to me at times that as big as that is, that the experience, that's the outer cosmos, that's Osar, the Aset, the inexperience, has to be just as vast, probably more vast. But at some point, those external ideas and thoughts and values that we have are supposed to serve a particular purpose. Going to church is not the purpose. It is a vehicle. It is the boat. It is to get us somewhere. You know, unless you're living on a houseboat, you on a boat to get somewhere, to do something, to accomplish a task. And if your totality is to just be there and to do this day in and day out for the rest of your life, you're not moving along and doing what it is that it's designed or was meant by some, not all, but meant by some to do. So that for me is the progression. That's the idea. At some point, you know, we talk about, at least for me, the most revolutionary thing that we can do is be an African. And if we're gonna be an African, damn it, let's fucking be Africans and do it and quit talking about it and be about it, basically. And that's a part of our reality. You know, it's shedding off that fear, because that's all it is fear. And having this reality that's not based on what somebody else is controlling. Because let's face it, everything external at this point in time is controlled by other people, but your experience is not controlled by them. And there's such a vast amount of understanding, knowledge, wisdom, understanding, all of that comes from having that internal, that experience going within. And like I said, things like astral projection and mushrooms and LSD and all of those things can be used beneficially with a purpose. Not just because I want to get lit. No, that's reckless. That's what's his name, Smith in the Matrix. He lost his purpose. He just started replicating himself. We've lost our purpose. We're replicating the shit out of ourselves, you know. So, but with that dogma based on a purpose, then all of those things become beneficial to our experience and our evolution.
Well, let me ask you this, because you keep mentioning astral projection, and you talked about the the scene in the movie Black Panther when he went through what you call the experience. So explain to me what is astral projection and how is it done?
Well, I'm gonna say what I have to say, and I'm gonna let War, because you know he's gonna get all technified about it and break it down with the more, what you call it, verbose in on it. But essentially, all it is, we see our physical body, but that's not all that there is to our makeup. We have other bodies that are able to exist outside of this flesh, you know, what we would call souls or spirits or whatever. And being able to separate ourselves from this physical and go into another plane, another existence, is what astral projection is. I did it once, and I ain't gonna lie, scared the shit out of me. So I decided to put it on the table for a little while till I was in a better mind state and evolved along to endeavor in it a little bit. But think of it like, okay, you've seen the cartoons where somebody will get hit or get shot or whatever, and this like ghost, they'll die or whatever, and this ghost comes up out of them. You nod your head to something, you know what I'm talking about, so I'm not just talking.
I know what you're talking about.
Okay, thank you. This ghost body comes up out of that body and looks at them and walks around and does whatever. That's kind of sort of what it is. You have this other body that's not bound physically. It's attached, we're attached like an umbilical cord to the physical, but it's not bound by it. And if we understand how to use it, if we understand what it is, I've read and been told and had experiences shared with me where people in that realm, in that reality, can think about being at the pyramids, and they're at the pyramids. So it's this level of existence where time and space are irrelevant, because time and space are a part of our physical existence. Time is something we created, because it doesn't really create. And that, I guess that's a whole nother conversation, but the physical, having to take a plane to go to the pyramids, all of that is something that exists in this realm. But in other realms, it's though, like I said, the rules and whatnot are not like what we interpret rules to be, what we understand rules to be. So and like I said, War, I know it's going to get much more technical about it. But yeah, that's the best analogy I think I can give you, is the cartoon where the body, the I guess almost etherical body, comes up out of that physical body, and it's still you. So I mean, there's a lot of back stuff to kind of understand before really understanding that. But yeah, that's about the best I can give you. Go ahead, War.
All right, I'm not gonna get too technical, honestly, and I'm not gonna touch on it much, but I'm gonna say this. I like people to be able to have a basis of applying anything that we talk about. So people that in the Panther community, we have what we call our 3Ds. This is why I like to kind of go into trifactors, so people are able to actually become part of the practices, or come part of a concept. That way you don't have to do any memorization. It has to be natural. Going back to what Psycho was talking about rules, and in both of y'all actually about rules, the thing is when you have a student-teacher relationship, the idea here is that as a teacher, you give people parameters, you give people the rules, and the rules basically, from the concept we're talking about, this just goes into natural law. Natural law, rules, same concept. If I am working toward being a proper practitioner and wanting to have an experience that actually reflects an experience, then I need to go about it utilizing a specific set of rules. And if I do not utilize the proper rules, I'm not going to have the proper perception. Therefore, my thought would not yield the necessary action. Going back to thought, perception, and action trifecta. As it applies to astral projection, the same holds true. The point being is, if as a student of the inner self, I do not know how to navigate that plane, it's no different than not knowing how to navigate the plane of a everyday perceived world. For example, we use our eyes to look around in the forest. We use our eyes to look around in the city. When you ask somebody, what do you see when you look in the forest? And they say, well, I just see a bunch of trees. And ain't nothing out here. It's like taking somebody, one of the experiences I have oftentimes, I take somebody out in the woods and I ask them to point out different life. And they say, all I see is a bunch of trees. And I say, well, keep looking. I hear some birds, but I just see trees. They're not able to even identify with life in the forest. So if my eyesight can't even identify life, then when we take the senses out of the situation, how am I going to be able to astral project and perceive anything in that world when I don't even know how to navigate in the conscious, quote unquote, conscious world? And so that's why we have to go into this with a preparation, kind of like when y'all was referencing the movie Black Panther, just going into what's referred to as a hallucinogen from Africa is I messed up the names, but it's ayahuasca, which is KWASHI, is a type of plant, which actually referred back to the same thing that they used in the Panther movie, where you mash up and you go through a certain ritual of even preparing this basically energy so that it can be partaken properly. And like referencing that movie, remember only certain people of a certain bloodline within that movie could even have the experience. Otherwise, what would happen to them if they took it, they would die, which is no different than talking about someone having an overdose, because the recipe is not prepared properly. If a recipe is not prepared properly, then obviously just using a basic concept, then when I cook it, then it's not going to have the desired and necessary taste, texture, or effect upon me. And no different in that science, in that world. So recreational drugs, should I say, from that standpoint, have a different purpose and an entirely different meaning and operate on an entirely different set of rules than the ones that help you connect your physical perceived world with that of the all of everything that is interconnected. And so from that standpoint, when we talk about astral projection, it is a built-in tool that we all have, an awareness that we all have that reconnect us with all of life. It is just a way of having an experience that reconnects you with all of life, so that you, as going back to your conscious wake, when I say wake, conscious day-to-day reality, recognizing that there is more to life than me staring at buildings and just seeing concrete, staring at woods and just seeing, trees with leaves on them and nothing having actual, well connected, well life and harmonization. It's kind of like when I would think about when Psych used the word pan earlier. Keep in mind when we talk about, and I apologize, Ian, maybe you can correct me on the African terminology, but one of the mainstream terminologies in dealing with creation is called panspermia. Panspermia, when you talk about pan basically from a Greek god concept or whatever, is basically just the god of synchronization. So you talk about synchronization, and spermia basically means life, the synchronization of life. This is what creation basically means. And so from that standpoint, when we talk about astral projection, it's just a gateway to allow you to have a actual experience to relate to the external or experienced world, knowing that there's a connection, knowing that there's a bridge. Going back to the walking on water example, the teacher holds your hand and guides you across. That is that vessel. That is that vessel within that religion that we talk about. Because when you talk about mainstream, or I would just say religion in general, it has to do with having fellowship. Fellowship basically means that a group of people are able to come together and share in on their experiences and their practices so that we can become more refined in our spiritual experience. As you become, which is what the natural progression is supposed to be, is student teacher. That's how you keep the spermania part going, or the cycle rebirthing. The cycle must rebirth. In order to stay in balance within life, then everybody has to, that is a student, must become a teacher, and you pass that on. You regenerate, or you regrow. That's the rebirth part that takes place. So at some point, I'm supposed to be able to walk on water myself, and then I'm teaching someone else how to walk on water. So the vessel itself becomes you. But because so many of us as people have a lack of structured rules or discipline, as cycle go into, we don't know how to navigate the open world, yet alone the inner world. So, it's like a person stuck on a phone when they need to go up the street all the time. They get to a point to where they don't even know how to just guide themselves just through day-to-day traffic. They depend on that navigator, that electronic navigator. Well, if you take somebody from that perspective, you take somebody that is completely constantly dependent upon external means of navigating who they are. How can they have an inner experience? Because if I can't navigate through the sensory world, if I don't know how to actually listen to sound, if I don't know how to actually see sight, if I don't know how to taste, how to smell, how to take full advantage of my sensory inputs, then when you take these inputs away from me, then I'm going to be in total chaos. So therefore, they are not prepared to have an inner journey. So the thing is I would say, just from a warfare standpoint, the way life is lived by most people, it constantly puts us in a state of flux. Once your mind and your brain and your habitual path is always in a state of flux, you are not prepared to take on sets of rules that require strict patterns in order to have an inner experience. Therefore, the best you can do is take a recreational drug and zone out, which is completely different than what you would experience if you are a practitioner of connecting yourself to the all through any type of what we call ancient I refer to as ancient wisdom or path of the righteousness. So these things have been labeled and misguided in terms of the average person intentionally. I think it's basically warfare, and it's intentional warfare to keep us from being able to be at one with who we are and what we are, because these things go right back to self-determination. These things go right back to being able to recognize how life is a part of everything and you are a part of everything. Because once you are at that level, then there is no separation between life and death. When there's no separation between life and death, then you have no fear of death. When you have no fear of death, then you have the ability to create your own definition, your own define, and then defend. So now you have a cause. Being able to create your own cause is a dangerous weapon if you want to put it in the hands of everybody. And that goes against the idea of controlling a population. So for the sake of social control and social order and social engineering, it is best to keep your people and your population at a flux, not having the ability to be able to cipher and navigate between worlds. You don't want them to navigate between worlds. You want them to completely depend upon your navigation. So you continually, as a systematic government, you continually want them to have to hold your hand, and you never want them to let go. So you keep them in the aspect of always being a student that is, I would say, a slow student. someone that is always going to be behind in school, having a never-ending, a perpetual concept of graduation. They never graduate, so they never become actual mastery of anything. So this is why we find so many people constantly recognizing that there's something greater out there. But if you're untrained, it only makes sense that the first thing come to your mind is there must be more out there, because you've been trained to look away from in there. You don't even recognize that it's all within. Everything that is out is a reflection of what's in. So you don't know that everything that you think that is out there is actually in here. You don't get that. So again, thought, perception, action, there is no direct connection that you have anymore through your perception between the thought and the action. So that to me kind of goes back into why the concept and the discussion of astral projection is something that most people are just not even ready for. You have to be in the right headspace to be able to take that in. And so therefore discipline has to have a way of life with you. Going back to what we said earlier in regards to balance. So balance and harmony has to come into play. The three parts of the human, the basic three parts of the human, going back to that trifecta, the physical, mental, and spiritual, have to be in one accord to just even really ingest the medicine to properly have those type of experiences. Otherwise, you have, going back to the concept of mushroom, you have a bad trip. And having a real a bad trip, people don't come back from. Their perception of crossing over is going to be way warped. This is where movies like Alice in Wonderland come from. Most people don't know that that movie is about a mushroom trip. So when we talk about stuff like that, most people, when they go down that rabbit hole, even going into the movie Matrix, they refer to it as a rabbit hole. Most people don't recognize that's what that movie is going into. The same thing, having an inner world experience. The point being is that is so fascinating in that sense to most people, because it is far beyond their reach. Their level of discipline is not capable of maintaining that rigorous set of instruction just so that they can become one with that world. So the relevance of this, and as it applies to everyday people, is that developing an inner sense of purpose means that you must accept the fact that there are rules to every game. Every association has a specific set of rules. These rules are actually for the benefit of everything. Natural law is a rule. You have to know how to obey natural law. You have to know how to identify with natural law first and foremost. Then you can obey it. But if you can't even identify with it, then there is a certain perspective that you need to start taking just so that you can get used to that. So the habitual patterns of dysfunctionality need to grow into a habitual pattern of discipline. And I'm leaving it at that for now.
Do that with this, because we now let's go back to the religion thing, because we talked about that, and Ward just touched on something dealing with people not certain people in a dominant society not necessarily wanting people to have that inner experience to be at a point where they no longer have to depend on things outside of themselves. And see, that's what happened with religion during the time when Rome went into Israel, went into Hebrew territory. And I use these religions, the three major Western religions, Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, because these are the primary religions that most people build their spiritual foundation on, or claim to build their spiritual foundation on. And Christianity was co-opted by the Roman Empire and then redistributed to the people in a way that took the power, the spiritual enlightenment itself from that religion, and put people in a position where now they're just simply following dogma. They're simply sheep. And most of the time, these sheep are led to the slaughter. people that don't read their scriptures, people that don't really practice these teachings, people that are club on Saturday night and then get up and go to the church on Sunday, believing that this saves my soul, or people that focus completely on following another man's perspective and version of those religious teachings. And this is why religion itself fails to do what religion was meant to do in this day and time, in this society. This is why these things put us in the position that they put us in. But I'm going to go a little bit deeper than that, though. Let's go a little bit deeper. I'm not going to go as spooky as he did with astral projection. I'm not going to go that spooky just yet. But we're going to go a little bit deeper. I'm going to go a little bit deeper. That was a shot. I'm going to go a little bit deeper. Now, before I do that, I got to ask you a question. You said you've been wanting to have this conversation since I came back from my vacation, and based on and you have a perspective of my views of spirituality. That's what you said, if I quote them correctly. And so what does that mean? What is your perspective of my spiritual understanding of my spiritual view?
Well, and keeping in mind, I said we ain't discussed it, so I know it's going to fall short or whatever, but just from what I've been able to glean and whatnot, it's logical. That's it.
Thank you very much for the compliment.
I mean, it's reasoned out. It's rational. Yeah. It makes sense. Boom, 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 boom. But it hasn't stepped to the dark side of the moon.
But see, to me, we're rational creatures. And if we understand what the word ration means, the root of the word ration is ratio, which means the way out. So we think, well, we're supposed to think mathematically. We're supposed to think mathematically. And this leads to what my views of spirituality are. I believe that the creative energy of the universe, the thing that the average person calls God, that thing is the only thing that ever existed. Nothing else. That thing is the only thing that existed.
But if that thing is the only thing that ever existed, that thing is not just logic. It's also emotion.
Hold on. I'm supposed to go there.
Come on.
I'm gonna bring that into existence.
Come on.
See, but that
you gotta bring logic into existence too.
No. I'm supposed to do all that. That thing is the only thing that ever existed. Everything else was created by that thing from that thing.
Okay.
So there is nothing that exists that isn't using that thing as its original resource.
I disagree.
What exists that doesn't come from a resource?
The phrase you use, there's not a thing that doesn't use, or there's not anything that's created that doesn't use that thing.
Yes.
Suggests separation.
No, you missing it. You missed it. You jumped off the boat too quick. You missed it.
Say it again.
Okay. I'm using physical words and physical terms. And the reason I'm using these terms because I am a physical being on a physical planet. And so I believe that in order to get to one point of reason, you have to start where you're at and then work your way from A, not shoot straight to Z, but then move to B, to C, and move in a logical succession of things. I believe that's what you have to do. If you shoot from A to Z, as Walt was saying about the average person dealing with astral projection, it's just something that they're not intellectually ready to deal with. The people don't move from A to Z. You have to move A, B, C, D, E, and show the progression. And so that's how I'm talking right now, because I am a physical being on a physical planet and I'm using physical words. So that's how I'm discussing this point of view. So we gotta start here. When I went to court, certain things just didn't have to be argued between lawyers, and what they called it is they just agreed that we're going to accept certain things as that's what it is. We're going to accept that. You and I may have different views and different viewpoints, but we can agree that basically we just gonna say the sun is the sun and the moon is the moon. Because if we sit up and argue and try to figure out what the original name of that thing was, we'll take all day arguing that. Let's just concede that we'll accept that it's the sun. And that's the point of view that I'm communicating from. So scientifically, everything that you see in reality, everything that you see, everything that you look upon. And when I say reality, let me make sure I make myself clear. I'm talking about the things that are phenomenal, the things that I can see, taste, touch, smell, and hear. Anything else is new nominal. It could be imagined, and therefore I can't weigh it. So I deal with the things that I can literally weigh, that I can literally look at and deal with and prove. That's what I'm talking about. So everything that we see, everything we come in contact with, this phone that we're on right now, these cameras, everything, that shirt you got on, everything has an original resource. Nothing popped up out of the blue. Nothing just appeared out of the clear blue sky. Magnificently, just magically appeared. None of it. And if it did, I've never ever seen that thing in my life, that something just pop out of nowhere. So it had to have an original resource. So it leads us to believe and to accept that everything that has ever been developed had a resource that it was developed from. Glass comes from sand. Paper comes from pulp. Everything has a resource, original resource that it developed from. Even this thing we call reality. I'm saying that the original resource is the creative energy of the universe, the unmoved mover, the first cause, the supreme consciousness, whatever words you want to call it, God, Yahweh, Allah, whatever you want to call it, Ra, whatever term you want to use for it. I'm saying the supreme consciousness is the original cause. And I'm saying that from the supreme consciousness, everything else rolled out or through a certain vibration came into being. And through the language of mathematics, the supreme conscious created reality. The supreme conscious used rationality, the language of mathematics, ratio, to produce everything in our reality. That's what I'm saying. One of the key mathematical formulas that it used to turn spirit into matter is E equals MC squared, which is assigned to Einstein, which is said he what's the word? I don't want to say invented. What's the word I'm looking for? What did white people do to the Indians?
Massacre?
No. What does it say they did with America? They found discovered. Yeah, there you go. That's the word I'm looking for. That was said to be discovered by Einstein, but it couldn't have been discovered by Einstein because it is the mathematical law that created reality.
Well, that is. Let me say something. Let me jump in. Remember in the very beginning, I used the word I, which is everything yields energy. That's all E equal MC squared is. It's the same thing. I'm giving you a higher way of looking at it because I want us to identify with a symbol, I. So
that's what I'm talking. That's what.
Yeah, that's what you're saying.
Yeah, that's what that mathematical formula says. It says energy and matter is the same exact thing, just moving at different rates. That's what it's saying. Anytime you look at a mathematical formula, the equal sign it means that whatever is on the left side of the sign is the exact same thing as what's on the right side of the sign. But when we look at the mathematical formula, on one side you have an E. On the other side, you have MC squared, which are the same exact things. They're the same things. And this is how that unmoved mover, that supreme consciousness created physical reality by understanding that changing the vibration of energy would produce matter. Matter is still energy because matter is nothing more than atoms rotating around each other. And atoms are nothing more than balls of energy. So it's all energy. Everything that we see and look at is energy. And everything is just different forms of energy vibrating at different levels. So it's all that original unmoved move. It's all that supreme consciousness manifesting in different levels. That's essentially what I'm saying. I'm saying the supreme consciousness is the original resource that our physical reality was developed from. You're saying by me using those words that it's creating a separation between the two. I'm saying there is no separation because at no time and I'm not going to go into the whole how the universe came into being, but a sun exploded, the particles of that dust got trapped into the gravitational pull, started rotating around the sun, produced our solar system. This little planet called Earth evolved man, At what point of time did the Earth stop being the sun? At what point of time did that sun stop being the supreme consciousness? It never stopped. It just changed form.
Let me use your spell casting to open this up even further.
Spell casting. Hold on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's what we're doing. So let me
That's why they call it. That's why they call it spelling, because you casting spells. That's what it is.
You're constantly using the phrase "at what point in time." I want you to just marinate on that.
Yes, I understand what you're saying.
So the first concept I gave you was I, which everything is energy. The flip side of that would be none, which is nothing operates negative, meaning that as long as we're talking about things that are manifested or things that have a physical or what's referred to as a tangible existence, then obviously, if I'm talking about something that doesn't have a quote unquote tangible existence, then that would be a no thing. If we're talking about things, then we can give it those definitions. Okay, but let's also just take this from to a scientific perspective in terms of where modern science it is on the general sense, and talk about quantum mechanics and quantum aspects. So when you talk about the quantum world, then you recognize that there are things that are unseen that also have properties. See, when you talk about things, you're talking about properties now. When you're talking about properties, now we're going back to our senses. And during your discussion, you said something that you can't see. You kept referring to your sensories. This is why when I talked about astral projection, we're moving beyond the realm of the sensory input. That's why I use the example also that if I asked a person to look into a forest and they can't define life because they're stuck with a limited ability to have a sensory recognition, how can I have a discussion with them now about the no thing? I can't. They can't even perceive the world that is being bombarded within their sensory input. So you're not ready at that point to traverse the other side of the coin, because no thing can't be defined through the sensory input. This is why I also gave the example of how do I describe to you what an apple tastes like if I never experienced an apple. There's only so much I can go over to. There's only so much I can even describe to you about astral projection other than what you can try to rationalize or relate it to. But I still can't really give it to you. You have to take it in and have that experience within yourself and that experience within yourself. So,
but see, I don't disagree with you. I don't disagree with you about the no thing, because that's what I'm saying. I just called it something else. I called it supreme consciousness. The no thing created the thing out of itself. The no thing. See, the no thing has certain laws and rules, and the no thing in the physical reality, as you just talked about, has other laws and rules. And the only way the no thing can experience this plane of these laws and rules, it has to travel and navigate, as he just equated the boat to that physical body. It has to navigate in a vehicle that actually can experience this reality because of the mathematical laws of this reality, which is the human body. Right. Which is the human body. The human body, this nose is the only nose God has. This tongue is the only tongue God has to taste reality with. This ear is the only ear God has to hear this reality because of what level this reality is vibrating on. See, supreme consciousness is just that, isn't it? And it's supremely intelligent. And that's why I said mathematics is the law of the universe. I mean, mathematics is a science that the universe was developed in. Now,
the language of the universe.
The language of the universe. Now, to say all that, it would mean that as E said, and I keep saying that there's a separate. There is no separation. We just don't recognize the no separation. And the goal of human life is to come into the recognition of the no separation and to be back where we was originally what was always meant to be. And that is the supreme consciousness. So we came from supreme consciousness to this thing just so this thing can evolve back to supreme consciousness. That's the entire job. That's the entire role, duty, and responsibility of the human being. That's what you're supposed to realize. Okay. And hold on, let me say this. I might need to let you jump in right there because I might open a whole nother can of worms when I say, to me, the most revolutionary thing that a person could be is God.
Okay, let me say this real quick because I want the point is that this is to educate the our people. What I just ended on, that note he ended on, was going back to purpose. It really is going back to purpose. And what we're talking, the way we're talking, we're not actually contradicting each other. When I use the concept and making sure I threw out spell casting, that's to bring the people back into the recognition that the words we use are intentional. Most people don't use their words intentionally, psych. And since they don't use their words intentionally, they don't recognize that when you're saying the word thing, that you're actually drawing into the awareness that we're talking about something that is dealt with through the sensory input. Just like when I say no thing or nothing to most people is still a thing. They can't equate to the concept of nothing. Nothing to them is still something touchable and tangible. And if it's not, the word is defined to them as being this a concept of not knowing how to get from point A to point B. That's what nothing means to them. That means they don't know how to navigate. So the point is we want people to recognize the fact that all words have a purpose. All words have a specific, direct way and rule that they operate within. The problem is most of us speak or spellcast without that knowledge. And since we don't have that knowledge, most of the things we say are in contradiction with the natural law because we're not utilizing language as a proper tool to even procreate with one another, which is what conversation is. It's supposed to be procreation, but we're not using it for that reason. And since we can't use it for that reason because we don't have that level of awareness yet, or have been basically retarded and reversed back to not having that level of awareness, no matter how old we call ourselves, then these kind of conversations go way over their head. So if we're saying things that you don't quite get, rewind it and listen again. Rewind it and listen. You often find that you may listen to something or read a book or watch something now and take in so much, and then months from now or years from now, go back and watch or read or the same thing or look at the same thing, and then you'll have a different perspective or perception on it. Because maybe at that point in time when you were initially watching it, you wasn't at that level, but it may have guided you or helped initiate or spike a specific path to get you to a certain point to where you can now refer back to it, which is goes into that concept of Sankofa. All of these elements are there. It's just that going into defining purpose, you have to recognize that you must be on dealing with the trifactor: a purpose for the individual, a purpose for a family, and a purpose for a community. These things have to have a balance. So going back to the aspect and the overall theme of what we're talking about today, what is balance? What is balance in being? Balance in being. Go ahead. That's all. I just wanted to throw that out there and make sure people are on point with what we're talking about. Because if they're not, then none of this conversation makes sense to the point to where they don't even understand why they're even listening to this discussion.
Well, you know, one thing about war is that war is the anchor. War always makes sure he gives the proper interpretation to the people. And let me say this, because you know, one thing that we understand is that we say the Panther 48 YouTube channel is for the purpose of categorizing revolutionary knowledge in general, but Panther ideology in particular. And many diehard Panthers will say, well, a spiritual or religious conversation has absolutely nothing to do with Panther ideology. But as we said earlier, we're discussing the different things and elements that make the human being whole, that create a thriving community. So yes, I could see how some of these words and terms could seem foreign, and we need to keep that in mind and make sure that we properly interpret these ideas, these concepts to the people. And that's one of the reasons why I don't have religious conversation. When I was teaching young brothers in prison, one of the things that I told them is never teach in the language of spookism or conspiracy theory. Now I know what y'all thinking. True indeed, there are real conspiracies in the world. There's real conspiracy, and it's intelligent sometimes to go into those theories. But what your open opposition has done is made the conspiracy theorists look like a nutcase. He's made them look stupid. Because see, you got this white ball knocking the hell out of all the colored balls on this green playing field represents the earth. And so if you allow yourself to be pigeonholed and put into this type of corner, then the people will not listen to your scholarship, because they'll be like, oh, that's one of them crazy Negroes. There's much information and knowledge to be got from William Cooper's Behold of it is not 100% beneficial. Just like in the there's one guy I don't like. I don't like David Icke. I don't like his books. Don't like him. He talk about, I don't even know how to say the word, Anunnaki, and whatever, however you pronounce it.
Anunnaki.
Anunnaki. Yeah, I'm 100% against anybody. You can't bring me any scholar or any book when they say that aliens came from outer space and built Egypt. I'm just not going for it. I refuse it. You can't get me, because again, you're going all the way to the extreme to take Egypt out of Africa, away from African people. And I'm just not willing to go for that. So they aliens just so happen to look like our animals. Wow. Their aliens just so happen, their life forms just so happen to resemble our animals, which to me is insane. But I just said that, I didn't want to touch on that right quick. Eve, do you have anything to say before I move to the next point?
I guess I'm good.
Okay, he didn't say anything. Now, let's go back to E, when E said the most revolutionary thing you can be is African. Let's go back to that and tie that into spirituality in some way, form, or fashion. So one of the things we do know, and there's no debate about it, we understand this without a shadow of a doubt, that the original man is the African. The original man of the planet Earth, the original human being that ever walked the planet was Black people, African people, and they came out of Africa. We know this. There is no doubt, no one can argue or debate it. So to me, that's saying that the supreme vehicle that God, supreme consciousness, the unmoved mover, chose to walk the planet in was that vehicle of an African. That the African is the human, and everything else is the different kinds of man or mankind. So the African is the man, that original man that was made, made in the image of God, and everything else is mankind, which was made in the image of the original man.
Are we supposed to fight about that? I don't understand.
No, I
mean, what the fuck?
No, not at all. I'm just making the point of going from what we talked about, the no thing, and the no thing producing our physical reality, and then this physical body being the vehicle that we travel this reality in. I just want to touch on that point. That's all.
Well, let me say this, and then let's let E elaborate more on it. When we're talking about the average person who, or should I say this? Let me just use a metaphor: the cockroach. Most people live an existence of a cockroach that we're dealing with. This means that you're stuck in a survival mind state. When a light cuts on, you run for the darkness. When the light cuts on, you scatter. When your meal comes a crumb at a time, your blessings come a crumb at a time. You are not in control of your environment. You are in an existence that have you going from corner to corner, crack to crack, cover to cover, always being elusive in terms of your environment. That is a cockroach existence. That is the existence of a person that has not mastered their actual destination or the actual destiny, or recognize being on a journey. This is somebody that may have mastered the art of evasion, which goes into or goes against being at one with nature as it applies to being in control of yourself, or being self-determined. So most people are living a cockroach existence. So from that standpoint, when we get into saying that the most revolutionary thing you can be is be African, I look at that as basically going from a cockroach existence to existence of something that is truly being itself and not actually operating from survival, but operating from living. So survival and living take on two different forms and dynamics. So when we talk about revolution, even going into the concepts of the Panther ideology, dealing with the 10-point platform and program, we take our people from a position of having survival programs, which are programs that are geared toward meeting people's direct needs so that they can elevate to a higher level of being able to control the access and operation of these things, which takes them into a position of living. So to me, when I think of the most revolutionary thing we can be is be African, it is when you're talking to people that are living a roach-like existence. So I let E break it down even further, or just
you still have that cockroach tattoo on your back?
Yes. it is not, since you went there, it's not just a cockroach tattoo. What people need to notice, it is a tattoo of a roach transformed into a scarab beetle, which basically represents the fact of the transformation journey. So I'm talking about the journey from survival to living from that standpoint. So yes, that is still on me. It's still with me. It still rides my back because it is part of my physical existence that I feel we are always in a state of constant battle between, or calibration between, survival and living. Now go ahead, E.
What the hell you want me to say? Period. Now, there you go. I'll let what y'all said, period. Yeah. Very good. I mean, what I don't know that I could expand on it any more than that without beating the dead horse. I mean, yeah, it's still, for me, the most revolutionary thing an African can do is to be an African, to be who it is we are, because everything in this life that we experience right now is counter to that, counter to that reality. And that goes from the way we eat to the way we acknowledge our existence on whatever multiple levels we acknowledge our existence on.
I was gonna let you finish. I was gonna add on to something you just said.
Well, when people, if somebody says that, you said something a while ago about how religion and all of that is not a part of Panther ideology or something along those lines. Somebody says that, that's completely not true. I mean, what is it? 1, 2, 3. Third one's Black liberation theology. So it's not the condoning or the advocating for this religion over that religion, or pray this way or worship that way. No, we don't do that. That's not the thrust of it, but gaining a greater understanding of how your theological perspective affects your trifecta, your self, family, and community. That's absolutely a part of what it is we're supposed to be doing. So I concur. It's not something that I would normally engage with people, any people, is religion. Again, because people ain't ready for that type of conversation, particularly, a real conversation. But at the same time, you can't just not talk about it because we're worried about people ain't gonna feel it, people ain't gonna like it, people ain't gonna understand it. People ain't gonna understand the word trifecta or perspective or ideology. They aren't gonna understand this shit. But at the same time, just like it's been said before, we want to we want to bring up ideas and concepts and bring them up in ways that will garner the attention of sisters and brothers that ain't just or ain't living a particular lifestyle. You know, yeah, we want the cat in the street, but also the cat in the boardroom. So, okay, let's have the sister or brother that's EFI, you know, have a sister or brother that's practicing something else. You know, all of those aspects of our reality. And I think it's a disservice to not mention it, to not bring it up at some point. Because again, the whole idea of revolution or growth or any of that is going to be completely over the heads of the masses of the people, even those that study. So yeah, I think it approaching that taboo in a particular way has to be done.
True
Yeah.
indeed, true indeed. Now you talked about to the way we eat, which leads us back to something else that we talked about earlier. I'm glad you said that because I'd almost forgot to touch on this point. You was talking about that I work out religiously, and because there is a harmony, there is a balance that exists or that is supposed to exist between mind, body, and spirit. There's a balance there. See, if the body is sick, if it's decrepit, it can affect the spirit and the mind. If the mind is diminished, it can affect the body and the spirit. All these things consistently affect one another in some way, form, or fashion. I remember years ago, I'll never forget this. He said it years ago. And I ain't gonna say who we were talking about, because we're gonna keep complete respect. But he said that the physical body is a representation of where your spirit is at. The body is just essentially mirroring where you're at internally. And he said that a long time ago. You probably don't remember saying that. It's been over 20 years ago. But and I believe that. You know, one of the things I learned when I took psychology, learning frameworks, was about how the things we eat even affect the quality of our thoughts. And there's a beautiful interview on YouTube right now. I forget the guy's name. I might send y'all the link later. Probably I already did. But he talks about the standard American diet, and his white guy. And he's building on how the food that we eat creates the sickness in our body, the cancers, the diabetes, the things like this. And it affects our energy levels. It affects the quality of our thoughts. Basically, it makes us weak. It makes us cows. And I just dropped a video on my personal YouTube channel with the brother Pharaoh building on these concepts. I can't remember what I called the video, but I just dropped that video, and it was after he saw that YouTube video that I was just talking about. But get to the point, the things that we eat, how we eat, the things that we put into our body, these things affect the quality of our thoughts and our ability to move to that experience y'all talked about, because we're poisoning ourselves with things like sugars, high levels of sodium, high levels of grease, and high fructose corn syrups and things like this. When we're poisoning ourselves with this, we're actually, every time you eat, every time you're chewing on something, you're telling your DNA something. Because everything you take in your body is trying to utilize for cellular repair and regeneration. It's trying to use in some way, form, or fashion. And when we cause this disease in ourselves through the way that we treat the vehicles that we came into this planet existence in, then it affects our spiritual development. In scripture, it talks about the human body being the temple of God, and it's as what you defile the temple of God. So this is where my workout ethic kind of comes from. My workout is a spiritual thing. One of the things I used to tell the brothers when we was training on the yard in prison, one of the things I used to tell the brothers, they used to be like, why are we doing so much? We're doing too much. We don't have to do all that. You don't have to do all that if you just want a nice looking chest. If all you going for some nice looking arms, then you don't have to do all that. But I'm going for something different. See, no one will ever be able to punish me the way I'm willing to punish me. So no one can stand in front of me and put me through more than I'm willing to put myself through. So nothing can come into my path that I will allow to break me, you know. And I shot it to you. I shot it to you earlier this week during that text conversation. It's something that I've used consistently. I told him that this is the knowledge of how to birth the wisdom of God, and I use that in his number format, that's how I remember it. It's 1927. 1 is knowledge. 9 is born because it takes 9 months to give birth to a child, for the most part. 2 is wisdom, and 7 is God. Universally, 7 has been accepted as the number of God. 1, 2, and 3, knowledge, wisdom, and understanding. 1 is knowledge, 2 is wisdom, 3 is understanding. 1 Corinthians chapter 9, verse 27. And I say that this is the signs of how to birth the wisdom of God. In this verse, it says, the Apostle Paul is reportedly have said this, that I beat my body daily and I make it my slave, so that as I preach to others, I myself will not fall short of the goal. Now listen at the conversation. We talk about words. We love wordplay. We love as verbose as Brother Warriors, we love wordplay. I love etymology. We love the use of words. It says I, as War talked about earlier when he used the I beat my. Now here's another way of viewing the self. I, my, mine. These are ways of viewing the self. He's speaking of himself as the I, and then he speaks of his body as a possession of his. He said, I beat my body daily, like I say, my car or my shoes or my cup of coffee right here. When I speak in the term of mine, I'm talking about ownership. So he's talking about his body as something he owns and not identifying himself as his body. He said, I beat my body daily and I make it my slave. So that as I have preached to others, if I talk all this spiritual talk to other people, I myself won't fall short of the goal. So you got to ask yourself, who is the I that he's identifying with? Because he's identifying himself as something separate from the body. And that's one of the things that I believe is important for us to do, because it's so easy for us to fall into the trap of believing that we're completely our body. It's easy for us to fall into that trap because it's where we feel the most. Our body is where most of our urges come from, our hunger, our sleep, our horniness, whatever the hell you want to look at, it comes from the body. So it's so easy to say, well, this is the realest thing I got, because this is the thing that I feel the most. But the I, the true I, the thing separate or deeper than the body, because see, you can think about your body. Your body cannot think about your mind. You can even think about thinking about your body. And when you go deep into the self and you truly understand that that thing that's doing the thinking is what you truly are, then it puts you in a higher position than the body. But what you have to do is bring the body into subjection. You have to take the body through what I like to deal with as the 10 virtues of a student. Because the first virtue is control the thought. Once you learn how to control the way you think and the things that you focus your attention on, then it moves to the second virtue, which is control the action. And once you gain control of action, then you gain steadfastness. You're able to stand firm and not be moved or swayed by outside stimuli and outside forces. So these are the things that I believe, this is what motivates my workout regimen. This is what motivates the workout regimen I got. This is what motivates the diet. This is what motivates those things, because I understand that's just not some separate compartment of life. That is as much a spiritual practice as somebody meditating for 10 hours or fasting or any of those things. That is as much a spiritual practice as any of those things. And a lot of times, again, you'll find yourself, I was talking to a sister not too long ago, and I was explaining to her that a constant diet of alcohol and weed, a consistent diet of this daily, takes away your ability to really vibrate at the high level that you could vibrate in, because you can't even trust your senses anymore. You can't even trust your own instincts, because you've taken yourself so far out of your natural state of perception that you can't even trust what you see or feel it. You understand what I'm saying? And I just wanted to touch on the physical aspects. And there, like I said, there's a balance there. There's a balance there. If your mind has the wrong information, if your body has the wrong food and it's in a sick state, then there is no way you can consider yourself to be or even think you're going to reach some kind of higher spiritual evolution. It's just not going to happen for you. And if you haven't reached a certain level of spiritual evolution, you're not going to have the discipline necessary to put your body where it needs to be, to put it in check. You're not going to have the discipline necessary to gather the information needed to elevate and refine your mind the way it needs to be. It's just not going to happen. That balance has to be there.
And see, now, I ain't never been to the penitentiary, so I take my inspiration from the TV series Star Trek. I forget which particular series, because there were a bunch of different ones that came out over the years, but there was one, and there was something that one of the characters said that stuck with me. they said that every time man creates a new technology, he creates at the same time a layer between himself and nature. And, you know, if we look around, people don't used to, if you wanted to hear music or singing, the family would gather around a piano, or even further back than that, we would gather around some type of physical instrument and we would play the music ourselves. And we would have that one-on-one, that touching and that feeling and that creating and being a part of the experience. Whereas now we just push a button and the music plays. So we've created this digital world on top of this false physical world, and we're getting further and further away from being able to have the conversations with ourselves through things like making music and expressing. And that's why I know for me, when I do the mashups and whatnot, it's along the same lines that you're talking about. As a matter of fact, I know I mentioned the war years ago. I think you were on vacation back during that time, Psych. But when I would get up and give the speeches and whatnot, it wasn't so much the classes, but it was the speeches. I needed to have a brother near me, not trying to do the whole, you know, FOI, or we got people standing around us or whatnot, but because when I got done, there was this period between me finishing and me, I don't know, coming back, so to speak. My head was spinning. I wasn't quite in tune with what was around me. And if there were stairs, I was really worried I was gonna fall down the stairs because I was off balance. I wasn't there. And I would have to ask them, you know, how did I do? What did I say? Did I piss people off? So it was a sort of an out of body experience. It was something else other than me. And to relate that back, the creation of art, you know, painting and all of those things, again, that's something that we used to do that we no longer do. And I think that it also relates to things like gardening and animal husbandry, being able to connect to what it is our reality is really supposed to be in this world, as opposed to going to the grocery store to grab some food. We actually invest ourselves and create. We have this conversation and we give birth and we do these things as a way to you know, have a spiritual experience. You know, putting your hands in the ground and pulling food from the earth is a spiritual experience, just like, you know, anything that you've listed or wore or whomever, simply because it ties us back. It's a religion because it's taking us back and reconnecting us with ourselves and who we are and their reality. And I don't know if you've ever read or watched any Dr. Sebi's videos, but SEBI, Psych, I don't know, like say, but I think that you would really like him because he talks the exact same thing that you're saying. Maintaining what is an alkaline. Yeah, an alkali balance in your body to maintain, to ward off disease, to have these, you know, these this ability to connect. And what better way to boost that, to promote that, than to grow your own food, than to practice as animal husbandry. And again, that all goes back to being African, because that's what we did. Wasn't no Walmart in the Congo Basin, you know, 12,000 years ago. It didn't go down like that. And we had a much better perception of ourselves, our connection to the world, our connection to one another. There was no real conversation. There was no debate. And I think it was Chancellor Williams said all African religious systems are essentially the same in the base principles and ideas. And it's at least in part because of the lifestyles that as a people over time developed. So yeah, again, it's gotten kind of boring because ain't nobody disagreeing no more. And yeah, Now what? Y'all done fucked it up. We had a good debate type thing going on, and y'all want to start agreeing with stuff. I really don't appreciate that. Boring. We're never gonna be big as Charlemagne the God.
Let me say this: the discussions that we are having right now, going back to what Psych was touching on, was basically when he talked about the religious discipline he had in terms of workout. We're talking now about how most people are at a dis-ease, whether we're dealing with the physical, mental, or spiritual, which goes back to the balance of the being that a topic that we're discussing, is the fact that we're all we're doing now is pointing out characteristics of being at dis-ease. And so he started off going into the dis-ease of the physical. He's talking about the dis-ease of the mental, which is why he say the most revolutionary thing we can do is be African. Let me explain this just so, and then we can go into that further if we need to. When we say African, we're talking about the African before colonization. We're talking about the mind of the African. Uh-oh, there we go. Can y'all hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, we're talking about the mind of the African that was in a position of being, that was not domesticated, that was not influenced by colonization, that was not influenced by being a part from being in control of the environment. What are we talking about? The mental, physical, or spiritual? We're talking about the African that is basically self-determined. So it goes into degrees of Pan-Africanism now from the standpoint of having control of our land, having control of who we are and how we operate and our position within the world society, instead of being that of a cockroach or that of someone that is constantly being ravaged from. So the African we're talking about, and this is for those people that happen to may be from Africa directly through, this particular generation, their generation of where they've touched soil or was birthed on that at this particular generation, not being confused and saying, well, I am African, or I'm from Ethiopia, or I'm from the Congo, or whatever. The point being is we're talking about not being colonized, not being of the state of where what may have caused you to come to America was to have what you deemed to be a better way of life, which means that you went into an existence of possible escapism, depending on where you are. So I'm not trying to offend nobody, but the point is, when we talk about being African, we talk about us not being in a position of victimization as a people, period. And then recognizing our power and operating from a position of our self-empowerment through our genetic ancestry, through our genetic birthrights. So that's what we're referring to. You can clean it up if you need to. I just want to make sure that people recognize that we're not distinguishing your physical birthplace from your lineages of Africa.
Then we do videos on that. Go back and watch the other goddamn videos. This sister that I was talking to for a hot second from the continent messed up and tried to tell me I wasn't an African. I blocked her number. I didn't want to deal with it. No good. You can't, no. So yeah, I mean, that's exactly that. I mean, that's the revolutionary aspect of it is knowing, because sisters and brothers on the continent are just as fucked up as we are. The only advantage they have is that they're at home and we're not, which may well be a disadvantage. Maybe we have the advantage being on the outside and being able to see some things, that's debatable, whatever. But the reality of it is, yeah, it's absolutely a mind state. And what's his name? What's your boy's name? Umar. Everybody's saying unapologetically black and all of that, but he never said that. He said unapologetically African, and knowing what that means and what that entails, because like I said, Africa being in as colonized a state as it is, Africans there today are just as not African in a lot of ways as we are. If you don't believe me, go to their churches. They defend and I was watching something the other night. I don't know why I allowed myself to view this nonsense, but this brother who was in Africa was or is a Christian minister, and he actually tried to or was trying to find the good that came out of Stanley Livingston and them other white folks that went down through there and started chopping up the continent. Well, some good things came out of that. No, dog. So the mind is the ultimate. The mind is what we're talking about. You know, we have billionaires, black in this country, billionaires and millionaires, but yet we're still the brokest group of people on the face of the planet, because the physical, okay, but their minds are not where they need to be a part of the movement, the struggle and whatnot. So again, it all goes back to the mind state, you know, wealthy, poor, whatever it is, it doesn't matter if your mind is not right. So that revolutionary move, that revolutionary act is more realizing that you're an African. Number one, that's the most revolutionary thing you can do, because now you're starting to turn the corner. Now figure out what exactly that means. Now go into all the things that you've done in your daily life, that you still do in your daily life, and look at them from your own mind state. But that's that first step. There still ain't no argument. So I'm still bored. I really wish somebody would do something, say something.
Well, I think
Say
that's
something.
all.
Say something silly.
It becomes impossible. We thought you were going to combat. Well, I thought you were going to combat some of this stuff that we had been saying, and
You ain't said nothing that need to be combated.
yeah. Well, I guess all we can do is discuss and have a good discussion on it.
That's boring.
Part two then. We got part two to this.
See, you missed what happened was you underestimated me because I never discussed spiritual things. So you were like, oh man, my dude went to prison and came home with a completely what's the word I'm looking for? Sterile view of religious concepts.
No. See, I just didn't chime back in after y'all had, you know, talked about that a minute ago. But when I say logical, I'm saying created. It's not, it's experiential. It's experience.
And you putting emotion over logic.
How is that emotion over logic? Now
I'm asking, because you said a while ago you compared emotion to logic a while ago.
Well, no, I mean, emotion and logic are equally as important, you know, and I think one thing that always turned me, well, like I said earlier, people view spirituality as goody-goody and all of that, when the reality of it is spirit doesn't give a damn about you. You're only, this physical existence is for the purpose of having experience, because this is the only way that spirit can have experience is through this illusion of the physical. But I wasn't putting emotion over logic. I was getting to the idea that we're not logical creatures. We're logical and emotional creatures. This existence that we have, because emotion is just energy in motion. You know, we can sit there and reason all day long. That's not the totality of experience. In fact, that's boring as shit. Emotion is what makes it, to me, the experience worth having. It's the passion. It's all of it. I'm an artist. I mean, what the hell? I couldn't do what I do without that emotional drive. So no, my thing is that the perspectives are still based on the external as opposed to the internal, as opposed to actually, and I, for lack of a better word, or trying to relate it, they're still theoretical until you step into the experience, until you know, everybody talks about opening your third eye. Okay, well, what does that mean? It really doesn't mean, I mean, unless you know, it's the experience that I'm trying to get to. It's stepping across that line. I mean, we can, you know, I get that discipline and working out and all of that are spiritual expressions, but they're not a spiritual experience. you know, unless you're, you know, you mentioned things like meditation and all of that. Meditation, again, are rules and guidances that are supposed to drop you off at that experience. It takes you up to the door, or it takes you up to the edge of the boat, and then you step into the abyss. You know, you don't things like meditation. Well, I've already said it. It's just that. It's a way to get somewhere. It's the being somewhere. That's the next step, and that's the conversation we hadn't had.
And see, all of those, what you just said, though, like I was saying about the workout, the discipline of the workout. It's the practice, as you just said, that leads you to the edge of the boat. Meditation is the practice. So we need these exercises in order to become that thing that you call the experience, as you call it.
Absolutely.
Now, for instance, meditation. The root of the word meditation, remedy, they all have the same, medicate, they all have the same root. And meta literally means to heal. So in the act of meditation, because Asian is the act of, so in the act of healing, what are we trying to heal? We're trying to heal that thought drifting. Most people think they have thoughts. Most people don't actually think. They thought drift. Thoughts just drift back and forth across their mind with no actual control over those thoughts. Thinking is a process. It's actually a process that you've learned to take control of and learn to direct. That's the difference between a thought and a thought drift. That's the difference between thinking and a thought drift. You said that to add to the meditation thing. Matter of fact, I want to go here first. I want to talk about logic and emotion. Now, both of them, yes, they're equally important. They're part of who we are. The problem, I believe, is this, and I created a theory. I call it the scales of information development. And in this theory, I divided the two different types of builders, the people that have gained certain levels of knowledge. And I divided them kind of like Star Wars, the light builder and the dark builder. The light builder is motivated on logic, on reason. And basically, I do what I must do because it is the thing that needs to be done. Not because I have a feeling for it right now, because the problem about moving off feeling and emotion is when I don't feel like it, I'm not going to move. If I don't have that emotional shock at the moment, I'm not going to move. The logical person, the rational person, yes, they have that emotional feeling, but when the emotional feeling, because emotions subside, emotions move in and out like the tide. And when they subside, the logical person, the rational person can say, I'm going to work because it needs to be done. I'm going out to the Panther headquarters and putting in this 8 hours of education or building at the headquarters because it needs to be done, not because I feel like it today. And see, on the side of the dog builder can only move off his emotion. That's it. Without an emotion behind his action, there is no movement. Now here's the problem. Here's the pros and the cons of that. The dog builder can move faster, and he could move faster toward his power because emotions, as you just said, is energy in motion. It's a boom. It's a nice shot. The problem with it, emotions can be uncontrollable. Emotionalism can lead a person into destruction. So a person has to learn how to check emotion. If you're driving in your car and a sign come on that tells you that you're almost about to run out of gas, that's the emotion. That's what emotions are for the human being. It's a sign to us that we need to make a change in something, whether good or bad. The logic is the steering wheel. It's then the direction that we choose to take based off the warning sign, off that emotional joke that we get that lets us know that we have to change, that we need to change something in our position. We need to change the oil, or we need to stop and get some gas, or we need to add air to our tire to raise it to a proper PSI. It's the things that emotion allows us to know all those things, but we have to learn how to respond to that emotion with reason. And that's why I broke down reason being the root of reason being ratio, which means to weigh or to think mathematically. And I think that is extremely important for the human being, not discounting emotion, but understanding that rationality ranks higher in the community of inner self than emotions do. And this is where I think we're going to have the argument that you're looking for.
But you're ranking them, but there is logic and emotion that there is no ranking. They're equally as valuable. They're equally as necessary. You know, I had to learn that there are emotional decisions that need to be made emotionally. That emotional decisions are just as necessary as logical decisions. That they're on the scale of how you make decisions. You get your information.
You have to prove that to me. I don't know if I can go with
Right.
that.
All right, y'all,
Emotional decision.
we're gonna have to let this get into part 2 because it's about to drop off.
Yeah.
But I do want to say what we're talking about. We're ending on that note of balance, and I say on part 2, what we get into now is polarization, because talking about polarization will go back to that discussion that y'all just that we're ending on now about that. Because I do want to say, and I say this before we close out, that I completely agree with what he is saying. The thing about that is recognizing, going back to when you talk about a light builder and a dark builder, recognizing how those properties interact. Because I kind of cringed a little bit when you talk about a dark, because from that standpoint, I felt like I learned to the degree I was led into mastering the art of dark science and dark psychology as it applies to that. And so the destruction has a very just as equal of a valuable place as construction. So I don't think when you talk about emotions, you should equate that with being a dark side.
And I gotta add this before we go. Now listen, don't think I'm saying emotions are the dark side. That's not what I'm saying.
Thank you. I just want to clarify.
What I'm saying, what I'm saying is this: the light builder and the dark builder have gained powers of the builder. They gained it. When you gain a certain level of knowledge, you have the power to influence other people. When a Dr. Umar, a Dr. Khalid Abdul Muhammad, a Farrakhan, a Malcolm X, when they stood on the stage and spoke, they inspired people and they could move people. Now, if they're light builders, they're moving people toward their own greater good. A dark builder can move people toward their own personal individual good, because the dark builder, what makes him dark, and I only use dark because these are the limited English words that we have to use to understand it. He's motivated off his own ego and his own personal aggrandization. And that dark builder operates primarily off emotion. Both light builder and dark builders have emotion. Both do. The dark builder leans and uses emotions more because he allows emotion to be the number one thing that motivates him. And that's where emotions, for any human being, if they can only move on their emotions, there's a problem. Because we're not going to always feel emotional about the things that we need to do. This is what I mean. And I have never seen a decision that needs to be made emotionally. I've seen decisions that emotions lead us to weighing out, but the decision itself needs to be made with our rationality and our logic. We need to weigh the pros and the cons. We need to view every aspect of it. We need to look at the counter arguments of the thing if we have the time, and make the best decision possible. So I've seen decisions that we are brought to through emotion, but I don't think the emotion itself should be the catalyst of the decision making.
That's going to have to be part 2.